Hi, everybody. Thank you for joining this event. You are very welcome to this TDM International Symposium on Travel Demand Management and the TInnGO and DIAMOND's final conference. We expect more than 60 international speakers, and we have more than 230 attendees registered so far. So we hope that this will be a major event where we will be able to share our new ideas, tools, and plans for boosting gender and diversity in transport and mobility in Europe. My name is Fuente Rause. I am from ITNL Research Center, and I am part of the TInnGO project. So in case you have any technical problem, here is the email you can write to. It is jornadas@ittn.com. As you probably know, we are part of a major organization team, which is also composed of Coventry University, the University of Dublin, Edinburgh Napier University, and EURECAT Research Center. If you are used to using social media, you can follow us on Twitter and LinkedIn. We will be doing a live coverage of the event, and you can also help us spread the word on social media using the following tags we are including here. So just very briefly, how to interact within the conference. You can interact among yourselves using the chat, and also use it for asking questions for the speakers. In this case, please, when sending your questions, indicate your name, surname, and the organization you belong to, so we can know who is asking the question, and also, of course, who you are addressing your question to. These questions will be raised by the moderators to the relevant speakers during the Q&A session and panel discussion, which is scheduled at the end of each session. After this short introduction, I would like to give the floor, first of all, to Wafa Saleh, who is the chair of the TDM Symposium. She's going to give us some introductory words. So, Wafa, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much indeed, Ancesla. Thank you. Good morning, everyone. I'm delighted to be with you today to welcome you all at the 10th TDM Symposium on behalf of the TDM committee and at this joint venture, which is titled Creating a Paradigm Shift Toward Gender and Equality in Smart Mobility. I will just say a few brief words on the TDM Symposium and the history of it. So the TDM, Travel Demand Management or Transport Demand Management or Traffic Demand Management, is the same name for applications of strategies and policies to manage travel and to manage travel demand redistributed into space or time. So we started the TDM Symposia in 1998 at Newcastle University, and with then Professor Peter Hills, Professor Mike Bell, Professor Gerd Zammer, who is here today, Professor Peter Jones, Professor John Nelson, and many more enthusiastic team members. The second symposium took place at the Imperial College in 2003, and it was dedicated to the memory of Peter Hills. From then, TDM Symposia became a more regular event. So in 2005, we held the symposia at Edinburgh Napier University, then in Vienna in 2008, then in Aberdeen 2010, Dalian in China 2013, Arizona 2015, in Taiwan in 2017, and in Edinburgh again in 2019. And today with you, the 10 TDM Symposium organized by TU Dublin jointly with EU Diamond and TInnGO Final Conference. So this theme of the TDM Symposia varied and reflected many revolutions in the transportation systems, including concepts, policies, and challenges. In terms of concepts, we went through many concepts from shift, like for example, shift from predict and provide to predict and manage, sustainability, smart mobility, smart cities, connectivity, mobility as a service, and mobility as a service, and the owner of some of these are with us today. We talked about policies, pricing, automation, automatic tolling, parking management, public transport integration, and ticketing integrations and policies. But there remain always challenges. And the emphasis have always been on the transport system, to optimize the transport system, but remains many inequalities and challenges. So, for example, inequalities of income, inequalities of accessibility, inequalities of car ownership, and inequalities of gender. So today, the TDM Symposium 2021, presenting a jointly hosted with Diamond and TInnGO's project to look at creating a paradigm shift towards gender equality and in smart mobility. So the event will be over 3 days. We'll discuss concepts, notions, methodologies, recommendations for future research, and we aim to develop and drive forward synergy between the academia, industry, and policy makers involved in our built environment to boost gender fairness and inclusion in this sector. I would like to take this opportunity to thank sincerely the organizing committee of this event. The work was very challenging, especially it involved 3 organizations at least, so that was something. I would like to thank TU Dublin, who made most of the organization and hosting the symposium this year, Chiara and her team. I would like to thank from Edinburgh University, Augustus, who have always been very helpful with all tasks. Diamond and TInnGO Diamond and TInnGO teams, Andree, Hilda, of course, Francesca, who done a great job with Marina from Eurocat and everybody. Thank you very much for all the work you've done. I look forward to enjoy this event with you. I would also like to extend my thanks to the delegates, my keynote speakers, chairpersons, attendees, and wish you all a very wonderful conference. I hope I will go away with lots of very good experience as ever. I hope you too will take as much as you can from this event. Thank you very much indeed. I would like to introduce now Maria Chiara from TU Dublin, who actually belongs to, she's got 2 hats today, so she belongs to TU Dublin and the Diamond Project. So Chiara, please take the floor. Thank you. Hello.
Good morning, everyone. As Wafa was saying, we were hoping to host this year event in Dublin, but the situation has been unstable enough to suggest that instead we try and do it online. And we've done so, I think, thanks also to AITEC and the other partners that are helping us organizing this event. In fact, Francis welcome you at the start because they are providing the facilities at the moment to run the conference in a webinar as the current format. I wanted to say a big thank you also to the program committee members, because as you saw, there is the availability of the e-proceedings that collect a quantity of contribution that came from the TDM community, from the large community of practice around travel demand and mobility services, and also some of them are policymakers, some of them are industry, and some of them are from the project that were funded by the European Commission. And in fact, we have a representative of the project officer that followed the project is present today to welcome you as well, because it's important that we acknowledge that all this work that you will be presented in the next coming 2 days was funded by the EU to support the fact of creating a paradigmatic shift towards gender inequality in smart mobility, as this is what we are trying to achieve and therefore discuss with you. If you want to download the e-proceedings with the wealth of contributions that we receive for the conference, please do so following the link on the TDM Symposium 2021.org that is available on this presentation. So on behalf of TU Dublin and the rest of the community, we welcome you, not physically where we are. We could have been also in Valencia. We all are in the safety of our own homes to try and weather the storm, and hopefully waiting for a better chance of mobility to enact its pace in the next few weeks. So at the moment, without further ado, I want to introduce you to another member of this organizing committee, which is Professor Andree Woodcock from Coventry University. And she's also I'm the dissemination manager of DIAMOND, as you know, and Andree is the principal investigator of TInnGO, who also is part of our team of people. And so without further ado, I pass the ball to you, Andree. Andree, if you're able to take over.
Thank you. Good morning, everybody, and thank you for joining us. I'm Andree. I'm the PI of the TInnGO project, and I'd very much like to welcome you and thank Chiara, Wafa and Fuensis for all the hard work that they've been doing to create this 3-day event. It has been a massive opportunity for us and a massive challenge. And thank you for the TDM to actually include us and include gender as part of their symposium. I understand that we are running late already, so as I am doing the first presentation after Anca anyway, I'll be quiet now and continue my introductions later on. But I'm sure everyone, well, I hope everyone will take value from this and be as excited as we are about the future challenges ahead and looking at creating a fairer transport system. So I'd like to now pass on to Anca Pasca, the project officer for the H2020 Transport Research Projects and the DIAMOND and TInnGO project officer. Thank you very much. Anca, over to you.
Yes. Thank you very much, Andree, for passing me the word. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you for this opportunity to introduce myself and the agency that I'm working for. I'm trying to share my screen, so I do hope that you see my first slide. So like I said, I work in CINEA, which is the European Climate, Infrastructure and Environment Executive Agency established by the European Commission. And I'm here this morning because I'm the project officer of the 2 projects that are organizing this meeting. So TInnGO and DIAMOND. I will try to be brief and not to take more than 10 minutes of your time. The content of my presentation this morning is being organized in an introduction and then a brief presentation of the gender projects portfolio we have in CINEA. Like some of you probably know, CINEA stands for the European Climate, Infrastructure and Environment Executive Agency. As you may know as well, CINEA is the European executive agency established by the European Commission for the implementation of many financial programs that underpin the European Green Deal. It builds on previous mandate on the agency INEA in terms of research, innovation and infrastructure for energy and transport. With the new mandate, INEA has got additional resources and competencies from the European Commission and other executive agencies to deal also with the climate, environment and maritime activities. So you see here the general scene on which we are placed with 6 executive agencies created by the European Commission and CINEA being one of them. Very briefly, what are we doing? So we are managing the projects from the publication of the call for proposals through the evaluation and selection of proposals which are replying to the call for proposals, the preparation of grant agreements with the selected proposals, the technical and financial follow-up of projects like TInnGO and DIAMOND, and we are giving the key feedback on the work produced by the projects to the European Commission. In terms of portfolio, like you can see here, we have all in all, since the 1st of April of this year, when CINEA took over from the agency INEA, we implement 7 programs for the next 7 years. Firstly, we have the program Horizon Europe for EU program, which is the EU program for research and innovation, and which replaces Horizon 2020. In the case of CINEA, we implement the largest part of the cluster on climate, energy and mobility, accounting to 9.6 billion euros. Secondly, we have the Innovation Fund, which reinvests incomes from the European Union emissions trading system. This fund is about bringing innovative clean technologies to the market. And then up on my screen, we have the biggest program of our agency that you all know, which is Connecting Europe Facilities 2, the largest program with more than 31 billion euros that implements the trans-European transport and energy infrastructures. I will only mention the other programs which are in the portfolio of our agency, and which is the LIFE program supporting the mitigation and adaptation to climate change, the Financial Mechanism Fund, Just Transition Mechanism, and the new established European Maritime and Fisheries Fund. On my next slide, you will see the funds that are being allocated to these different programs, which gives you an idea about the amount that the European Union is investing today in research, infrastructures, and innovation around Europe, and can also give you a hint about the number of the projects we manage across the countries of the European Union and in the world, because some of the partners involved in these projects also come from outside the European Union. So why are we here today, and what is the link of these global programs to the gender issues that you are going to discuss in this meeting in the next day? Well, CINEA has supported two projects that are addressing the gender issues in transport and mobility. And these are ongoing, because you're invited by them today, and they are TInnGO and DIAMOND. The total funding that the European Union has allocated to this project is over 6.5 million euros for the two projects, for their work, which is now touching upon the end, and that has continued for more than 3 years. We have funded this as part of the call Mobility for Growth from 2018, which had as a subject the demographic change and the participation of women in transport. The need for research came from the fact that the European Commission has identified the fact that there are societal and demographic changes that are leading that might lead to inequalities in mobility. And in particular, we wanted to see which are the women's specific needs that might not have been addressed sufficiently by the society and in the job opportunities related to the transport services. We have also noticed that there is a disaggregated analysis that can increase the knowledge needed to support specific policy measures to ensure a balanced integration of parts of the population, and that the intersectional aspects like age, social level, ethnic origins, education, and family compositions, for example, can indicate possibilities to adjust the transport systems to meet specific demands and increase social inclusion and equity. So based from this problems or possible problems that we know they can exist in the European society, we have asked the proposals that have replied to 2018 call for tenders to assess part of problems we identified, because we needed their independent views on the situation. So we have requested them to look at the specific transport requirements of women as users, but also as workers in the future transport systems, to analyze the influence of these intersectional aspects on mobility needs and on the participation of women in the transport-related jobs, to perform gender impact assessment of new technologies and business operational models in order to assess their acceptance and non-discriminatory performance, and to assess the gender relevant aspects of new technologies, including their acceptance and aptitude in using, concerning also the public transport accessibility in the context of social and spatial inequalities, and its specific feature, including the diminishing risk of violence. Last but not least, we have asked them to identify future needs for skills and opportunities for professional careers for women. All this are part of TInnGO and DIAMOND task in the last 3 years. In terms of results and impact on the European society, TInnGO and DIAMOND are expected to provide a new level of understanding based on identified new sets of data to be used in the planning of future transport system, ensuring their inclusiveness and a higher level of social equity. This has been done by the consortium of the two projects in the last 3 years, and will be presented partly to you today. A big part of the research is available on their websites and will be presented to you today. I hope that the results and discussions will lift up to the expectation we have, and I look forward to debating this with you. Andree, Francis, this is the end of my presentation. I hand over to you.
Thank you, Anca.
Thank you very much, Anca. And now we give the floor to Wafa, who is going to introduce our keynote speaker, Glenn Lyons. Wafa, the floor is yours.
Hello, hi. Yeah. Thank you. Right. Hello again. It's my pleasure to introduce my first keynote speaker, Professor Glenn Lyons. Good morning, Glenn. Glenn asked it to just give a very brief on his bio. So here you are. Glenn is a professor at Mott MacDonald of Future Mobility at the University of West of England. Glenn has devoted his career to understanding transport relations with changing society as the digital age and motor age have come together, with the challenge of what this now means for our future in the face of a climate energy. Glenn has already has a very hot topic and already modified the title slightly than what we have in the program. So I look forward to listen to you, Glenn, and seeing beyond white male privilege in the transport sector.
Thank you so much, Wafa. And can I just check you can hear me and see my slides to begin?
Yes, we can.
Fantastic. Well, thank you so much. Good morning, everyone. It really is a great privilege and honor to be doing a presentation in this opening plenary. As you can see, I'm a white man, so I'm particularly pleased that the organizers of the event have put their faith in me to do this opening presentation. I've enjoyed white male privilege all my life, although I was never really taught to appreciate that I had white male privilege, to understand why I had privilege, and appreciate better the implications for all those others in society who are not white and male. So with that, I've been on a personal journey, particularly through the pandemic, in terms of my development, and I hope a greater appreciation that I have of this privilege and the need to address it, both in our transport sector as professionals, but in terms of how people experience the transport system. Particularly the journey I've been on through the course of the pandemic is what I'd like to share with you today. That's a journey that's been punctuated by a number of activities and events, and not least the horrific killings of George Floyd, Sarah Everard, and Sabina Nessa. I'll set out in the course of our journey this morning 5 stages. First of all, in terms of some scene setting, some of the missed opportunities I think that I now recognise. I then had my eyes open much wider by a book that I hope many of you have read, and if not, encourage you all to read, which is Invisible Women by Caroline Criado Perez. If you've read that book and you turn your attention to the topic of smart mobility, I think you, like me, will start to see it differently and become more aware of trying to avoid the ignorance of gender in transport innovation. I was inspired and shocked by not only Invisible Women, but the Black Lives Matter movement. And Georgia Yexley is an individual I must pay credit to in particular, who prompted me to co-organise an event, a panel event, looking more closely at women of colour in the transport sector, and I'd like to share a little bit of that with you. And then to round things up, a reflection upon what I see as the journey we should all be on, which is one towards unconscious competence. And this is a journey, I should say, is very much me seeing through the eyes of others, people who I've learnt from to help better see for myself. If I may, I'd like to read out to start with these 2 quotes, but as I'm reading them out, please ask yourself the following 2 questions. Does this sound familiar, and is anything out of place? Transport studies, transport policy, and the transport profession as a whole have their roots in engineering, a discipline which has been and continues to be dominated by white males from high social classes. They've shaped not only transport policy in the field of study, but also the provision of public transport services, the structure of the built environment, and much of modern society's mobility-dependent social policy in their image. The invisibility of women in the monitoring and evaluation of transport policy is likely to continue to lead to transport policy that fails to serve the needs of women. Well, there is something out of place, and it's a date which I've misrepresented on this slide. Because if I take myself back to January 2003, just 3 months after, as a new professor, I joined the University of the West of England, these were 2 quotes that myself and my new colleagues included in a proposal to the Equal Opportunities Commission to address promoting gender equality in transport policy and provision. I'm sorry to say, from a personal point of view, that we weren't successful with our early proposal. So my journey may have been different had I got engaged in that work at a formative stage in my young professorial career. But I think more disappointingly, in terms of what might have been, is that these 2 quotes still resonate very strongly with me today, over 18 years later. So why haven't we made progress, and is now an opportunity to do so? Another experience during my years at the University of the West of England was in 2016, where as a senior manager, I took part in the Wheelchair Challenge as part of UWE's Disability Month. And I have to say, it was a transformative experience for me. It made me realize that when I changed position, I could see in a way that I hadn't previously how disabling the university campus environment was if I were not able to walk, but instead were using a wheelchair. And it made me realize that we need to create more opportunities for all of us to walk, proverbially, in other people's shoes as part of our education and continuing professional development. More and more recently, and this is a term that my colleague Stephen Cragg has used, which is transport philosophy. I believe that what we do in our research and our planning starts with the starts with the perspective we take, the way we think about the activities and the behaviours that we enact in our professional roles and indeed our personal lives. So it's a philosophical perspective that matters before we get into the detail of planning and analysis, and there we will be talking about data and indeed big data, and in turn the actions that are taken that really shape the very society and transport system that we all make use of and are part of. So, to opening my eyes wider open, you may be aware that Invisible Women was published back in March 2019. I found myself reading it earlier this year, and at one point early in the morning over breakfast, I felt so compelled to put something on LinkedIn by what I was reading, because it was beggaring belief, the things I was learning about the invisibility of women. So if I may just read out the first 2 paragraphs of the post I put on LinkedIn. Half the population hidden in plain sight, essential reading for any man in the transport sector. I'm halfway through this book and can't for the life of me work out how society, and transport especially, has got away with such willful ignorance for so long. This morning I've been reading chapter 9, A Sea of Dudes. Did you know that when it comes to crash test dummies, for decades they were based around the 50th percentile male? Cars are, in the main, not designed for women to be as safe in. When a woman's involved in a car crash, she's 47% more likely to be seriously injured than a man, and 71% more likely to be moderately injured. Yet consideration of females driving in crash tests is all but non-existent. Quite shocking, really. And I was also overwhelmed by the level of engagement in this post. There were over 1,000 engagements and over 100 comments. And I'd like to dip into those comments now, which I've organised according to a number of themes that stood out for me. I appreciate we won't have time to read through each of these anonymised comments, and I'm certainly happy to share my slides afterwards. But the first point, reiterating what I've just said, it beggars belief. And the quote at the top right, it captures it very well. I'm reading only a few pages at a time, both mesmerized by the power of data and terrified by the ignorance of those who govern our cities and countries. We really have been designing the world for the default man. And talking of men, I realise now from these comments that terminology is just so important. When gender is referred to, it means us. Us men need to be paying attention too. It doesn't deflect it across to becoming something for women to be concerned about and consider. Take the quote to the top left. My daughter bought me this book at just 17 at that time. She recognised this bias challenge in the industry that I work in. Well, my immediate thought was, my goodness, we need 17-year-old boys to be recognising this as part of their education. And this becomes the point, of course, as the quote on the right says, we need more men to educate themselves and challenge norms. The idea of algorithms designed mostly by men fills me with foreboding in the context of this book. So come on, white men, for goodness sake, pay attention. And yet, many of the comments on this post on LinkedIn that I placed were, surprise, surprise, from women, not men. Are men so rarely interested in this important topic, one woman asked? Because recognizing one's own privileges is the first step of change. I think the point on the right is especially powerful. How we hear gender, when we hear gender, we automatically think it means women, so men switch off. Race makes us think ethnic minority, so white people switch off. The dominant group gets away with disengaging because all of these massive issues are labelled as minority issues. Well, remarkably, of course, as a white man, I realise I'm in the minority in society, albeit that it doesn't seem that way when you look at the way the world's been designed. And why is it taking so long? I was having my epiphany reading Invisible Women, but of course, many women commenting on the post were sort of having their hands proverbially thrown up in despair, saying, my goodness, you know, finally you've arrived on the scene as another male who's opened their eyes. But as she says, many of us have been trying to create this awareness and challenge the unconscious bias for decades. Another colleague on the right-hand side highlighted that perhaps this does feel like a bit of an at last moment. And I don't think she's referring to Glenn Lyons waking up a little bit more, but an at last moment for our sector. Perhaps the developments through the course of the pandemic have made a real difference, give us some hope for real change. But nevertheless, we find ourselves realizing that men are living in ignorance while women are living in fear. And I'll come on to this in some greater detail. But I think the point on the right-hand side is just one illustration of how women are living their lives on a daily basis, often with men ignorant to that experience. Women often develop strategies like avoiding traveling at night, carrying car keys in their hand as a makeshift weapon, or feigning listening to music while staying alert. This turns our attention to possibly part of the answer lying in having appropriate data, but the key word there is appropriate. We need to understand the sorts of questions, perhaps uncomfortable questions, we need to be asking in order to get the right sort of data coming forwards into our analysis in a way that then appropriately informs the decisions that are being taken to shape our transport system. And yet, in spite of the eye-opening experiences you will get if you read this book or have had reading this book, there's still a sense that whilst it can't wait, we do still seem to be drowning, perhaps, in a sea of dudes, as Caroline Criado-Perez put it. And the important message at the bottom there, we really need to ensure that our current and future engineers do not make the same mistakes as have been highlighted in the past. Having referred to crash test dummies, you may be interested to know that Volvo, in fact, note in passing how overtly male the Volvo logo is, although I'm told it relates to the ancient chemical symbol for iron. But Volvo launched something called EVA, Equal Vehicles for All, where they decided to share more than 40 years worth of safety research on accidents and the development they'd been doing to ensure they were designing their vehicles for the safety of both men and women, but in contrast to the vast majority of the car industry over decades past. So with a certain sense that we've been able to take our blinkers off as we look at the transport sector, what happens when we look at smart mobility a little bit differently? Well, as Wafa hinted at in her introduction 2 years ago, I also had the privilege of being part of the TDM Symposium event, and I presented on walking as a service, a term I'd come up with really to describe what happens when you have Google Maps navigation in your hand, which empowers you to undertake a journey on foot. And it empowers you because it helps address very conveniently and easily 3 questions. How do I get there? How far is it? How long will it take? But of course, the elephant in the room is the 4th question, which it doesn't address. How safe will I feel? How safe will I be? Similarly, earlier this year, working with Scott Kane and Carla Jakeman, we developed further the concept that we call combo travel. This is the idea that people are living very busy lives, and many of us perhaps would like to incorporate more active travel, more physical activity into our busy daily schedules as part of the journeys we're already making. So how do we bring human-powered mobility into combination with a motorized mode, which enables healthier lifestyles, promotes lower carbon journeys? Indeed, you might see it almost as a super policy because it could have public health benefits. It could support the right types of motorized services, help with decarbonisation, and indeed lead to economic prosperity. In simple terms, imagine having the journey planner on your phone, but then being able to blend that with your Fitbit, where you're able to say to the journey planner, please give me a journey plan that introduces an extra 1,000 steps into my daily schedule today. That might mean catching a bus from a further away bus stop or getting off at a train station a stop or 2 earlier than you normally would. Sounds logical from a white, able-bodied man's perspective. And here, of course, we come to the fact that many women simply don't feel safe, quite literally frightened for their lives if they're out walking alone. This recent survey highlights that 80% of women of all ages said they'd experienced sexual harassment in public places. And the image on the right-hand side of Sabina Nessa, what I find shocking here is how it connects back to Google Maps navigation. The Daily Express were highlighting with this image the very short journey that Sabina hoped to undertake and complete, going from her home up towards, you see there, the depot. Only a matter of 8 minutes across some area of parkland, a journey that wasn't completed. If I can just press the point a little bit further, if I draw your attention to the image in this tweet at the bottom left-hand side of our slides, just look at that image for a moment, and I'm going to read out what the tweet says. Can anyone explain why even the most unremarkable bits of stations suddenly become so attractive at night? I wish you could hear it too. There are crickets or grasshoppers chirruping almost as loud as cicadas in America. Fond memories of summers waiting for Amtrak night trains. But my female colleague, Dr. Fiona Crawford, commented on this tweet in a very powerful way. She says at the top, I'm envious that men can look at this photo and find it attractive. For me and the women who commented on it, it sends a shiver down my spine. The sounds I hear are my heart racing, my footsteps echoing, and my inner voice praying that there's a taxi waiting outside. And to the right-hand side, a personal exchange between myself and my 25-year-old daughter, Florrie. Thanks, darling. Enjoy the gym. I'm looking forward to a run soon. Love you lots. Thank you. I'm still too scared to go out running. I miss it. Love you more. So opening my eyes even wider, as I mentioned earlier, was the Black Lives Matter movement, triggered in the United States by the murder of George Floyd, or amplified by that, coupled with Invisible Women. And I had the privilege of meeting Georgia Yexley, who absolutely inspired me to co-develop this panel session online, part of a fireside chat series. And the image you're seeing in the center here is the graphic I produced as part of the write-up for that. This notion of imagining not being white and not being male as a transport professional, someone using the transport system. Can you do that? There's some great resources which you're very welcome, and I encourage you to dip into, both a recording of that inspiring session, but also a fantastic reading list that emerged from it. 2 key issues that we were focused upon: white privilege, this sense of inherent advantage that's possessed by a white person, but then male privilege, a system of advantages and rights that are available to men, to me, solely on the basis of my sex. So the importance then of how we recognise that white male privilege. In overview, this event reminded us that perhaps many of us have been taking advantage of the awful unfolding of the pandemic as a time for some introspection, an opportunity to look for being able to greater empathise with those around us, and perhaps promoting now a willingness to ask rather than assume things about other people and their experiences of life, and importantly, creating an appetite for learning. Yes, my development is later in my life than I would have liked it to be. I should have planted that tree 20 years ago, but the second best time is now for all of us to make progress on these issues. I don't have time to go into the many rich insights from this particular conversation that I had the privilege of chairing, but I've just got 2 slides of some of the insights, and I'll pick out 1 or 2 things from them. An important point for me is that when it comes to seeing race and gender issues in transport, there really aren't excuses, because the resources are there and they're there in abundance. It's just a matter of making the time and having the inclination to make use of them. That issue, that point of changing positions, becoming so powerful to helping us become more self-aware of how different things can appear once that position changes. And there was a very powerful point regarding the problem that can emerge when, and I guess particularly white males, parachuting into other people's lives in other cultures and other countries, have an Orientalist mindset, as it's referred to, where we're imposing generalizations about country, race, and culture in ignorance. Indeed, having some sense of a savior mindset, because our way of understanding the world is somehow superior and we can shape the circumstances we're facing for others and deliver benefits to them, ignoring really our inherent privileges and biases. The importance of ask, don't assume, and certainly not assuming or presuming to tell others when we might well be in ignorance of our own legitimacy of perspective. Of course, in the transport sector itself, it is about mainstreaming gender and having a representative workforce that really helps us see much more clearly the issues that otherwise leave women being invisible. That's partly to do with picking up this issue of the data gap, but as I'll come to at the end, it's the importance for us moving from unconscious incompetence towards becoming unconsciously competent. And one of the real takeaways for me from this session was that I mustn't continue to be a bystander when it comes to addressing diversity and inclusion. It's important to be an upstander if you're in possession of white male privilege. I'm also a trustee of the Reese Jeffreys Road Fund, and we've been supporting a fantastic initiative called the Future Transport Visions Group, encouraging earlier career professionals to come forward with their innovative ideas about shaping a better future for transport. And 3 such inspiring individuals were Laura Brooks, Molly Hoggart, and Marie Godward. And they came forward, in fact, as Marie says, inspired by reading Invisible Women, with the proposition which they went on to develop of a gender equality toolkit in transport. And I can't commend it to you highly enough. You can see the web address here. And just to give you a quick overview, this is a poster that they provide on the website, which is your handy aid memoir really to the different resources that the toolkit makes available, but some checkpoints across the business of undertaking transport planning that really should be more inclusive in terms of how it's meeting people's needs. And I'm assuming because you're at this conference, your appetite is already whetted and you may be already heavily invested in this topic. But if it's whetted to the point that you need to gain access to more insight and hear more bright minds who are working on this topic, as the projects representing the conference are, please go out and look for Gender on the Agenda. It's an inspiring series of webinars that are all focused on addressing the problem of seeing beyond transport being gender neutral and understanding that bigger picture. So to move towards a close and also towards the notion of unconscious competence. But first of all, I want to just come back to this importance of thinking, the philosophical standpoint that we all take, because it's not about rushing in, particularly in relation, I think, to saying, data is going to be the answer. Let's take comfort in data in overcoming all the issues that I hope I've started to highlight in this presentation. It's a way of thinking, it's a mindset that we need to challenge for each and every one of us in order that we can then approach the task of being better researchers and better planners and offering better insights and influences over the transport system. So some of the questions become, well, what data should we be looking for? It's important about asking the right and sometimes difficult questions to access the right data. And to my mind, it's as much about what I call anti-activity data as it is about activity data. After all, how many journeys are not happening, journeys by particular modes, those walking journeys that we referred to early, because of the concerns that women have that we are not paying attention to in our planning. And fundamentally, data, of course, needs to go beyond observing, but to helping us better understand the circumstances and situations we're considering. Of course, it's not just a matter of men or women, but the heterogeneity of women really needs to be considered. So the notions of intersectionality, I've looked at ethnicity in the course of my journey and been exposed to that important dimension, but there are many other dimensions besides, of course. And indeed, there are non-binary people to consider who are even less well represented in these sorts of discourses about how we see the transport system. So as I quickly walk through these 4 stages of competence, as the model refers to them, perhaps ask yourself, where are you on this journey? We begin with unconscious incompetence, sense of being ignorant of the nature and significance of racial and gender inequality in transport. This can move on to become something we're consciously aware of, conscious incompetence, self-aware of needing to play a stronger part in addressing inequality in transport. That moves us, hopefully, towards being consciously competent, making the effort to influence the behaviours of ourselves and others to foster positive change in transport. And perhaps the nirvana, I'm not sure how many reach this state and manage to remain at it, but unconscious competence, where we're automatically behaving in ways that help progress greater racial and gender equality in transport. So just to move to the final finish line, Wafa, before I hand back to you. This is a photo I took a couple of years ago before the pandemic when I was enthused about the prospect of walking as a service, this main image. A black woman meeting an old friend, bumping into them on a journey, on a walking journey, better than being in a car or perhaps even on the tube. At the time, I thought it was an inspirational journey. It's how the world should be, certainly. And yet now I realise that it's not so simple. In fact, the photo you see inset here from my colleague Jonathan Flower is a much more recently taken one, a matter of weeks ago. And there just feels something inherently wrong about it, though I'm guessing Transport for London have thought this through very carefully. But here we have an able-bodied white male referred to in the background on one short walk, one less car journey on the road today. And I can't help but wonder whether that's still reflecting an undercurrent of ignorance in how we're interpreting the transport system. Earlier this month, I disembarked from a train station and had to walk back at dusk to my parked car some minutes away. And I took this journey. I didn't look over my shoulder. I wasn't clutching my keys. I wasn't alert for somebody unexpectedly coming up to me and posing a threat. But what I was much more aware of was how that experience might have been had I been a woman making that journey back to the car, and quite frankly wondering whether I would have made that journey. So this is very real, a very lived experience, which perhaps has been invisible for far too long. And finally, of course, we've just come through the last 2 weeks, COP26. We're facing code red for humanity, as Greta Thunberg, an inspirational young woman, reminds us. And with talk of a new normal coming out of the pandemic, it seems very clear to me now that that new normal needs both. It needs us to be decarbonising, but if we're going to do that, we have to do so in an inclusive way, which is where we become increasingly aware of and no longer see as invisible ethnicity and gender when it comes to shaping and redefining the future of our transport system. So thank you ever so much for listening, and I now pass back to you, Arthur.
Thank you very much indeed, Glenn, for a very stimulating and very interesting and very on the spot presentation as usual. So we might keep you as a keynote speaker in our TDM Symposium. You managed to find a very interesting presentation for the topic we go by. Well, indeed, I think I do agree with you. I don't know whether we're not paying attention or we're paying attention but choose to ignore what we see. I mean, it just reminds me of we're doing lots of work to stop cars driving in the roads. And we have in Edinburgh, the northbound of the Princes Street, no cars allowed there. So there's no cars allowed there. So I think that we are able to do things. We've got the data and the observations, and many people appreciate and acknowledge, but there is, hopefully not intentionally, there's been under a consideration of gender equality. But thank you very much for the very interesting presentation. Do we have 1 minute for question, or do you have any questions? What if we get questions more than what we can cope with here, we'll collect them and email them to you, so possibly you can respond to them and get back to them, or think about them and have another presentation.
Yes, thanks, Wafa. I'd love to receive some questions offline if there's not time.
Wafa, we don't have any questions so far, but as Glenn is going to be chair of one of the sessions today, he will be able to ask any question we may receive.
Thank you very much, Edith. Thank you very much, Glenn. Do you want me to introduce Andrea?
Yeah, please.
Okay, thank you very much, Glenn. And yeah, so our next presentation is from Professor Andree Woodcock. Professor Andree Woodcock from Faculty of Arts and Humanities in Coventry University has been an active partner in the EU and RC UK projects for the last 20 years, where she has been responsible for the design of user trials and arguing for greater, more inclusive engagement of end users in the design of a variety of transport and non-transport related services. She's a PI in a number of European projects looking at end-to-end multimodal journey experiences and on including framework FP7 and H2020, and PI also on our TInnGO partner project. Recently, Andrea completed awards include the AHR UK Global Network funded projects, when mobile, looking at gender transport poverty, and LAMEX Frank Jackson project, looking at use of empathic design approaches to understand transport from the older user's perspective. You find also further information on Andrea on her link, which is included in the on her website. I personally would like to thank very much Andrea for her efforts and unlimited success during the organization of this joint event with many challenges we faced. You've been a great organizer, Andrea, I must say. So yeah, please have the floor, and I look forward to listening to you.
Thank you, Wafa. Can everyone hear me?
Yes.
Yeah, we can hear you, but we need you to maximize your presentation, please.
Is that fine now? Yep. Okay, thank you. So thank you, Wafa, for that introduction. Thank you, Glenn. And I hope you can see how this interlinks with what you've been saying. I am the principal investigator of the TInnGO project, and today I would like to introduce the project to you and some of my project partners, but also this is very much a personal take on some of the work we've been doing. So thank you, Wafa and Chiara, for inviting TInnGO and letting us join the International Symposium. Very quickly, the overview of the presentation is that I will introduce TInnGO to provide a context for colleagues' presentations. And if you've looked at the programme, you'll see that scattered throughout it are presentations by TInnGO teams. So this will enable you to see where we're coming from. I'm going to say something about smart mobility, gender transport poverty, the wicked problems and the paradigm shifts that I hope we can achieve later on. Although we're coming to the end of TInnGO now, our work has not been completed, and I don't think it ever will be. This is an issue that we are very much engaged in, and it's not going to be over after 3 years. So TInnGO was funded under the same call as the Diamond Project, and our aim was to create the means of effecting long-term and sustainable change in transport, in particular in the then up-and-coming smart mobility sector. So we have smart transport on the one hand, but what we also want to do is look at the gender and diversity mainstreaming to create gender smart mobility that is inclusive and that is fair. And just relying on technology to make smart mobility smart is not the right approach. We need to look at social sciences and other ways of introducing the users into this. I have a project team behind me, which goes from Sweden to Ireland, Portugal and Spain, across to Italy, Greece, Romania, and the Baltic states as well, and Germany and Denmark in the middle. So it is a very large consortium, and most of those members form into the TInnGO hubs. A core notion of our project is setting up the TInnGO Observatory. This is a virtual online observatory, free to use by the whole transport and sector and other stakeholders interested in it. It includes an online gender data repository, which is safe, secure, and open to everybody to share their data. We have hub pages from each of the 10 hubs: Romania, the Baltic states, France, Sweden and Denmark, Germany, the UK, Portugal, Spain, Italy, and Greece. These provide an opportunity for the hubs to talk about and represent things, best practices and issues that are prevalent in their country, and alert everyone else to these. We have an open innovation platform where we're using designerly ways of knowing to look at different aspects of the smart mobility problem, and we also have a set of links as well. Each of the hubs has tried to set itself up as a semi-autonomous living lab. We have had a number of problems over COVID, but each of the hubs has a small domain of interest personal to them. So for Sweden and Denmark, this was around smart bicycling. For Germany, it was participatory engagement in planning processes. So there's a very small sphere that each of the hubs are interested in, and they've been doing work around this. They've also been engaged in data collection for the whole project, so we can get a snapshot of things like employment trends in transport, women's mobility patterns in each of the countries in the consortium. The hubs have also acted as beacons of engagement, activity and know-how for the local transport business ecosystem. I use TBE, the Transport Business Ecosystem, as a very quick way of saying everybody engaged in transport. But through the hubs, we've been trying to convince local authorities and local operators to use gender mainstreaming and to develop gender and diversity action plans to improve diversity in their organisations and improve the quality of the smart mobility. We've also been looking at citizen science and engagement, especially for women and vulnerable users. Firstly, to get them involved in the conversation about transport, to show us and tell us their stories, but also to look at providing the local communities with more information, to empower them, to give them skills where they can actually talk about smart mobility in a way that people will actually listen to them. We know a lot of the stories, we've lived through a lot of this, but again, people aren't taking notice of it and developing transport that we need. So we are all aware of the smart mobility visions, zero emissions, zero accidents and zero ownership, and the principles around flexibility, efficiency, integration, clean technology, and and safety, and late into this equation are accessibility, affordability, and enhanced quality of life. However, scraping the images off the internet and performing a visual analysis on these, work conducted by colleagues at the University of Copenhagen, we can see that this is technology-led. And we're also interested in the vision that is being sold to people of what future smart transport will look like and what society will look like if it embraces the smart mobility concept. Unfortunately, women have been very late to the party. What we want to do is get women's voices into this, get women's needs recognised, and look at and reduce the barriers towards their integration in this conversation. So Glenn's already touched on a lot of this, why we need a paradigm shift. Transport and mobility conversations have moved forward in academia, but they're not actually recognised at operational level. So we have issues around gender, transport, poverty, and intersectionality. We don't see these in practice. Glenn also talked about agency. Do women feel safe? Are they free to travel? What about this as a equality of life issue? Some women are afraid to travel out. They do not have the permission to travel out or freedom to travel when, where, and how they want to travel. Progress against gender and wider diversity issues is dismally slow, and we don't know why. There's been ample evidence in the sector and in other sectors to show that diverse workforces have more tacit knowledge and understanding of the problems, they have more creativity, more innovation, and they're more satisfied workers. But there is a resistance to acknowledge gender at national and organisational levels. Related to this is that our work on employment, education and research has shown that the same problems occur in different parts of the transport sector, and to be honest, in different areas of society as well. So we have the same gender pay gaps, discriminatory work practices, and lack of workforce diversity. To me, this points to a bigger problem. Okay, the transport sector is male-dominated and is still male-dominated, but there are other issues here which are perhaps keeping women down and not letting us have the attention we need. The evidence base is lacking and fragmented. There's still a lack of gender disaggregated data, and even with the current trials on smart mobility and like the travel plans for universities, we're still not collecting gender data, let alone doing anything with it. There are good practices across the community, and these need to be centralised and evidenced, and that is part of the TInnGO Observatory. In terms of a paradigm shift, I'd like to quote from Simon Norton on the Shropshire Bus Report. Transport is preeminently a human rights issue. People without access to transport can't function properly in the society we have built. We've come to tolerate a degree of discrimination against non-motorists far beyond what is in recent years has increasingly come to be seen as unacceptable. However, we can't expect transport on its own and the transport business ecosystem to solve mobility and sustainable issues. It is a wider problem than this, but transport needs to start integrating with and working with other sectors and agencies to provide smart mobility to address transport poverty. We don't need more transport. What we need is solving transport poverty as a key issue. And a first step towards doing this is to use gender action diversity action plans and gender mainstreaming. So transport poverty, I'd like to bring this into the equation. We're all familiar with the term, and from the definition of mobility and accessibility poverty, transport affordability and exposure to transport externalities, it becomes pretty obvious that some groups are exposed to greater levels of transport poverty than others. Women are a case in point, and gender transport poverty recognises that women are disproportionately burdened by added things such as their lower income rates, the multiple roles that they have to take in society, and social and cultural mobility restrictions. Glenn showed a route that he walked. I would never walk that route late at night or even in the daylight. I'm constantly alert because the public domain is not safe for me as a woman. When I walk along any path, I always look out for escape routes. And this shocked my partner that I was actually doing this. The problem with all this is that transport poverty leads to greater levels of social and economic exclusion, so it becomes a wicked problem. And this is nowhere more evidenced than in the intersectional analysis and the mobility indicators we've developed. So this combines the notion of intersectionality, which is the overlapping identities that have historically been associated with discrimination and inclusion, such as ethnicity, culture, age, ableness, religion, gender, and sexuality, with wider contextual factors, such as housing, economic activity, caring responsibilities, income, education, and class. And interacting with all this are the mobility indicators of affordability, effectiveness, attractiveness, and sustainability. So any transport system, any transport solution that is going to be appropriate and meaningful has to take into account all these factors. So it is very much a wicked problem. We've used this to underpin the gender and diversity action plans to develop a design tool to help young designers understand what they are designing, what they're designing into, and to be more empathic. And also it forms a basis of the Gender Smart Mobility Charter. So transport problems, transport poverty is a wicked problem. You can see the categories of wicked problems. They're never completely solved. They're unique. There's no clear problem definition. They're multi-causal, multi-dimensional, but they're the ones that we live with and we have to face. And gender transport poverty is one of these problems. And what we've been doing is trying to look at designerly ways of thinking to understand these wicked problems and the elements of them. So design ways of thinking is empathic, storytelling, listening, using design provocations, storyboarding to understand, not only to gather the rich pictures of people's experiences, but also to represent these in a design context and maybe move this forward in terms of design solutions. Okay, they might not be right, but it's easier to talk through maybe a design drawing or design elements and sort of untangle some of these issues and then look at design research strategies to look at these. So what's the evidence for the wicked issues and what does this mean in and for practice? The TInnGO research has shown, and we have data to prove this, which we'll be presenting later on, systemic gender and diversity biases in employment, education, entrepreneurship, a reticence to engage with discourses around gender, the omission of and willingness to share gender segregated data, especially from new mobility issues, with the recurrent themes of safety and security, which we've been talking about for 20, 30 years. I did research on crash-based dummies in 1999. It's still an issue. And the biases in the narratives that are being put forward by the transport professionals. To address this, we've provided a number of tools, and my partners will be talking about this in the conference. Gender and diversity action plans. We've implemented these and have case studies. Visual analysis of smart narratives being put out there by the manufacturers. New networks, mentorship and case studies for women entrepreneurs and employees. Training material, a free data repository, an observatory to showcase material and tools and methods for new designers and to increase diversity in research teams. Looking at the European Mobility Atlas, they very nicely presented a historical overview of transport from BC to the present day, and they looked at the motivations for this, which included the entrepreneurial spirit, military use, or simply the desire for new ideas. My argument is that the next motivation for mobility should be to remove transport poverty as a human rights issue, and we can do this by addressing transport more holistically and as a wicked problem. I'll end with a quote from Pierre-Jean Coulon. Transport poverty and inequality should become one of the central issues when pathways to climate neutrality by 2050 are being envisaged. This goal requires a fundamental transformation of Europe's economies and societies, affecting all sectors and citizens' everyday practices. It is therefore important that Europe's decision makers recognise the complexity of the social challenges associated with this green transformation. The TInnGO project has provided a set of tools that are free to use and openly available and perhaps can help with this journey. So with that, I would like to conclude. Thank you very much for allowing me to talk to you, and please listen to my colleagues' presentations over the next 3 days. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much indeed, Andrea. Very interesting. Unfortunately, we won't have any time for questions. We then shall provide you with any questions we get on your talk. It is time now to introduce my colleagues, Maria Chiara Leva and Francisco Santarremigia. Apologies, I'm sure the pronunciation is not right. On a talk on the fairness and the inclusivity of transport operators, moving towards a maturity model for evaluating services against users' needs. Please take the floor. Okay. I need to do the bio as well of you. So, excuse me, I'm just a bit coarse today. So Maria is the co-chair of the Technical Committee on Human Reliability for European Safety and Reliability Association, former chair of the Irish Ergonomics Society, and the co-chair of the Scientific Steering Group for the first Symposium on Human Mental Workload. In 2016, Chiara was awarded by the Enterprise Ireland and the National Digital Research Centre a female founder competitive start fund for her campus company, Tosca Human Factor Solutions. The campus company was a spin-off one of the EU-funded projects, so Dr. Leva led as a principal investigator. Dr. Leva also has more than 60 publications on human factors, operational risks, assessment, and safety management in science and engineering journals. She's a member of the editorial board for 2 of these journals. She is also a lecturer in Dublin Institute of Technology in the College of Environmental Health in Dublin.
Don't worry, Wafa, that's all right.
Well,
that's all right. Let's introduce
she's the organizer of this joint event of the TDM Symposium Diamond, which is she's a member in and the dissemination manager and TInnGO. Francisco, my apologies, I'll just say brief.
Can I introduce Francisco very briefly? Francisco, you start the presentation. Francisco is the scientific coordinator for the Diamond Project and the chief technical officer of AITEC Technology in Valencia. Francisco, the floor is yours, actually.
Thanks very much, Wafa. Thanks very much, Chiara. I think that you can see my presentation, right? Yes, can you confirm? Okay, okay. So good morning and welcome from the Diamond Project to everyone. My name is Francisco Santarremigia from the company AITEC, and I am the technical coordinator of Diamond. This presentation will be shared with my colleague Chiara Leva from Dublin, who is the dissemination manager of the Diamond Project. And first of all, we want to thank very much to the European Commission for this funding, which has allowed us to conduct all this work. I would like to start with a brief overview of the Diamond Project. The project's main goal is to turn data into actionable knowledge with notions of fairness in order to progress towards an inclusive and efficient transport system. The duration of the project is 39 months. The project focuses on 4 real-world scenarios or use cases where inclusiveness is currently a central issue. A goal was defined per each use case. In the use case 1, the railways and public transport is addressed, which goal is to increase the percentage of women using the railways and public transport in peak and off-peak hours. In the use case 2, autonomous vehicles is analyzed, which goal is to increase the acceptance level of autonomous driving by women. In the use case 3, bike-sharing systems were addressed, which goal is to increase the percentage of women using the bike-sharing system. And finally, in the use case 4, we addressed the employment in the transport sector, which goal is to increase the percentage of women employees in on-site and off-site job positions. About the consortium, we consider that only 20% of factors influencing on a more inclusive transport system are evident and the others are hidden. For this reason, Diamond created an interdisciplinary consortium with gender, psychology and social experts, jointly with engineers and technicians. The transport system is represented by the project as an inclusion diamond with vertices and layers. Some vertices address the present and others the future transport system. Each vertex has different layers covering all the transport system as a whole. The user or employee of the transport system is represented by the project as a polyhedral individual with different socio-demographic characteristics affecting the inclusion of this individual in the transport system. Each phase of this polyhedral individual, economical level, disability, age, etc., is a potential discrimination source. Mixing both model representations, the Project Diamond and other future projects will be able to address fairness intersectional assessments in the transport sector in a systematic and structured way. About fairness and inclusivity for transport operators, in the Diamond project, fairness was defined as a state in which people are treated similarly and not impeded by prejudices or unnecessary distinctions or barriers, except they can be explicitly justified. Needs and barriers of women were identified and clustered in 3 levels of detail. A hierarchical model of needs and barriers was defined per each use case, and the 3rd level allows to concrete specific actions and make the knowledge actionable. In the use case 1 about railways and public transport, this is the hierarchical model about needs and barriers of women. Level 1 are green boxes, level 2 are purple boxes, and in a level 3, in yellow boxes, a list of needs and barriers were identified and clustered inside each need and barrier in the level 2. In the use case 2 about autonomous vehicles, this is the hierarchical model about needs and barriers of women. Again, level 1 in green, level 2 in purple, and needs and barriers in a level 3 were also identified and clustered inside each need and barrier in the level 2. In the use case 3 about bike-sharing systems, this is the hierarchical model about needs and barriers of women with the same structure and methodology than the other 2 previous use cases. And finally, in the use case 4 about employment, this is the hierarchical model about needs and barriers of women with the same structure and methodology. And now I leave the floor to my colleague Chiara to address how the maturity model for the fairness assessment evaluates services against all these user and employees' needs. Chiara, I can pass your slides and present by you, because I think that you cannot share your screen jointly with me. So I can share.
If you can change the slides, that would be great.
Exactly,
okay,
exactly.
And
thank you very much, Chiara. Go ahead.
Thank you, Francisco. So the idea behind this was the following. We're very complementary to TInnGO. Like we were discussing, our TInnGO colleague looked into the concept of travel poverty, so the lack of a fairness travel system. And the lack of intersectionality in that analysis oftentimes. So what we provided was a set of tools that can also be quantitatively used to provide some form of assessment, like a benchmark across organizations, across service providers that can actually assess the level of fairness of the service they provide and inclusivity. So that was our aim. When we developed the maturity model, it was based on the same concept that the HSE in UK, for instance, developed for safety culture maturity model across organization. So it's based on the same concept. It's based on the simplicity of benchmarking across widely unknowledgeable and definable categories. In that sense, we built on the literature review and on the survey and thematic analysis that we did on the survey and follow-up interviews during the scope of the project on the pilot use case that we were working on. And we identified that there are 3 main themes, overarching themes, in many of the service provision use cases that we were able to tackle. So the first theme is capacity to meet required needs, which is, for instance, in the case of surface transport, is the ability to travel in appropriate design transport system, meeting basic expectation and being environmentally sound. The accessibility is the other theme, so how accessible it is for different type of categories of user in terms of physical accessibility, but also in terms of affordability. And then safety and security is the other big theme that actually was confirmed even in our factor analysis on the key elements seems to aggregate together, closer together in the one determining satisfaction of the user in relation to inclusiveness and fairness of the service transport and satisfaction overall. Those three areas are important and paramount. And safety and security, as you can expect, was actually not just specified by the female population. Both the male and female population that we interviewed clearly stated that as being important. More so for the women, unfortunately, still. And the level of assessment can be over observable variables, so variables that can be used in terms of punctuality of service, the metrics that are already used in many cases by service provision and service providers organization to evaluate their own services, alongside other metrics that could be used as an audit tool. Okay, so we did this exercise. You're going to hear about it in the coming days, tomorrow actually, about how this was, for instance, done in Warsaw, and now not only the service provider but also the policymaker in that country found it useful to go out there and audit how the service was delivered and how, for instance, accessible, visibly accessible it was or not. Then there is the user perception and satisfaction. So here in the information that you get back from the user themselves, and this is the form of a survey, and then a self-audit for management, which is the toolkit that we developed within the scope of the project. Francisco, if we move to the next slide. I can only tell you that the basic idea, again, is if you benchmark maturity model for fairness, we move across different levels. So an emerging level is a level where things are just still kind of low and taking shape. So as you can expect, only 30% of the criteria are above what we consider the medium threshold. For managing level, you have 45, well, from 30 to 45% of those criteria are in that threshold. And when we are in the space of 45 to 75, we know already we are moving into a space where the service can be considered already in a good enough position for being inclusive. And then when we are above the 75 threshold, we know that we are in the space of continuous improvement, which means there is no complacency, but we are in a good situation. And some of the service providers that we had that we were lucky to interact with are actually steadily moving in that direction. There is an interest to do that. Francisco, the next slide. So as we said, we consider those three methods and we provide those tools. So in terms of a self-evaluation tool, we provided the toolkit online. We have a user satisfaction questionnaire, the observation protocol, are all tools that are developed and can be given to those companies. They are available and downloadable and usable. And the self-evaluation audit is the one on which already benchmarking exercise can happen, and they can compare across different users where they place themselves. Okay, so many users are in the same category as themselves, and not only that, also provide a self-diagnosis of what their problems are, and from the good practices that were collected during the scope of the project so far, and we can increase that database, what recommendations do we provide to improve those aspects? What can be done to improve, for instance, such an aspect related to accessibility or safety and security? And the next, we'll try and be very fast because we know this is an example of the draft self-evaluation tool that we developed. In this case, it's for the autonomous vehicle service provision, which is quite futuristic, but not that much if you consider how fast we're moving in that direction. So in the future, we imagine that people can be using autonomous vehicle for moving around like a taxi services, and we looked at different characteristics of the service provision that were expected and what we consider to be poor or medium or a good capacity for that service provision. Okay, then we move to the next. So this is an example. The categories are normally in the range of 20 to 30 areas in those overarching team. And what happens once we identified a barrier? This barrier has a specific weight that is also based on what we collected from the users. So from the perspective of the user, how important is that aspect? And therefore we give the priority of those barriers, and we're able to classify them and give some recommendations that were collected, also providing them a sense of importance of that same characteristics. The next. So overall, at the end of the day, what do you get? You get an overall score on how fair you are based on the criteria that I highlighted previously. So how many, in how many categories the performance is above average or above the medium threshold. But not only that, we are, because we merged this, triangulated this aspect also with some of the aspects that we collected from the user satisfaction, we can also look at different profile of users, not just women, but also user, for instance, user that have experienced discrimination, user with disability, user traveling with companions or dependents, and see how those characteristics are relevant to them and whether or not they have been met. And this will provide a future insight for the company that wish to use the self-assessment maturity model. The next slide, Francisco, please. So eventually, we'd like to move in that space where the recommendation become more and more meaningful. Currently, we've only been able to, within the scope of the project, we've only been able to do a limited amount of workshop and a limited amount of, although extensive enough, of literature review to feed into the recommendation space. But if this becomes a living tool, and ideally we'd like that to become a tool that the transport, for the platform for women in transport, for instance, can adopt and use and deliver with continuity, because our project is coming to an end. So we like that platform to be adopted, to be used, because we find that it could have a future, and it is updatable, and it can be become a knowledge space that could be provided to other people as well for future generation, and becomes a stable tool of really benchmarking inclusivity for service provision across Europe, maybe not only. So the next, so this is where we are. I wanted to leave you with those quick link here, the Toolkit for Fairness EU, which is the prototype that we currently have developed, and you will soon be delivered also our white paper as part of the deliverable of this project. I'm aware that we don't want to steal further from your coffee break, so I just want to leave you with this impression before the coffee break. Please consider that having a stable way of benchmarking organization on this cycle of becoming fair and inclusive, and actually measuring themselves. What can measure gets done? Peter Drucker used to say, Nobel Prize for Business Studies. So I think it's the way to go. Is a good way of providing them a stable set of characteristics that they can monitor and assess themselves against, to say, are we fair in our service provision? Is our service provision inclusive? And if so, how? How can we prove it? That's the idea. Okay. So thank you for taking part of today. I think the coffee break is now in order, and we resume at 11, if I'm not mistaken.
Thank you very much indeed, Francisco and Chiara, and coffee break for 8 minutes. So thanks for receiving the coffee break from us. But thank you very much for an interesting overview of some of the work of the Diamond Project. Thank you very much for all speakers. Please have a coffee break and rejoin at 10 UK time, 11 Central European time. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Wafa. Thanks, Chiara.